So you want me to tell you the story of my life?
Like I said, that's what I do. I interview people. I'm a collector of lives.
Welcome to Table Talk. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. This is the show where I go one-on-one with a creator, author, illustrator, publisher, or other mover and shaker in the world of tabletop games, video games, TV, movies, or any other area of the geekverse.
You followed me here, didn't you?
Yeah, I suppose I did. You seem very interesting. This is where you live?
Yes, this is my home. Welcome.
So, what do you do?
I'm a vampire.
That's something I haven't heard before.
Guests have included individuals such as Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels, creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and even the author of Star Wars, A Pirate's Price.
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. I haven't gotten to talk to him yet, but maybe sometime in the future. But how about Brian Colin, the creator of the vast, grim, dark horror RPG and sculptor of the world of Revelo monster busts? Mark Tassin, the creator of the world of Italtus, head of Mechanical Muse, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. I've spoken with Jeff Engelstein, game designer and former commentator on the Dice Tower. He and I got deep into the statistics, probability, and psychological function of dice in tabletop games. Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games and crowdfunder extraordinaire. He's published many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. I've spoken with Sydney Engelstein from Indie Boards and Cards to talk about what it really takes to publish a board game in today's environment and what it would take for you to get published if you were trying to get a publisher for your board game. I've spoken with Ajit George about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft and his development of the Journey Through the Radiant Citadel Dungeons & Dragons book. Let's see, who else have I spoken to?
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne and the goddess of death.
Yes, I really appreciate her taking the time to speak with me. That was a great interview. I've also spoken with Cameron Pasha, a writer and novelist who's been working in Hollywood for over 20 years. His projects have included Emmy and Golden Globe nominated Sleeper Cell, Kings, Nikita, and Roswell, New Mexico. His analysis and commentary have been very popular on YouTube. I've gotten to speak with Paul Shadow, the former network executive who has made quite a splash here on YouTube with his reaction videos to current movies and films. He and I discussed the status of independent film and web productions online today. Brianna De Silva is a reoccurring guest on the show and a very popular one at that. She's an author and director, and she was also the co-writer of the cultist comedy web show that's here on the channel. She and I regularly meet to study and analyze stories. I've also gotten to speak with of the Positive Fandom channel. She's an ally in our effort to be a positive and constructive force in the Geekverse. Are you ready? Have you got your drink? Are you all settled in? You might want to buckle up because it could be a wild ride. We're about to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and the Geekverse through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger. Ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Hey, good morning, good evening, everybody. I'm confused as to which show this is. Good evening, everybody. Welcome here to the office. Welcome to Table Talk. Tonight, we are going to be talking to Doug Burton, who is going to be talking to us about Star Wars. Let's go ahead and bring him on. Doug, welcome.
Hey! What's up, everybody?
Welcome to Doug, and welcome to everybody in the chat. I see we've got Stray here. Robert says, hey, gang, looking forward to this discussion. So we've got James also in the chat, I see. Tomocrat, time for some deep dice. Yes, I said we're in the Discord server. We're going to be doing some deep dice. We do that here on this channel, obviously. Deep dive into it right here. TSL Frontman is here. Thank you to everybody who is a channel member here. If you're enjoying what we're doing here, the channel membership is a fantastic way to keep us going and to support this show and everything else that's going on the channel. So thank you so much. Oh, Zero the Blade just popped in. So thank you, everybody. Doug, do you want to do a quick intro for yourself? I think a lot of people know who you are, but some people may be coming in new here to learn about Star Wars. So you want to tell everybody who you are?
Sure. I'll keep it brief. My name is Douglas Burton, and I'm an author. I wrote a historical fiction book called Faraway Bird a couple of years ago, and the book did very well. And while writing the book, I was struggling with the hero's journey, which I still love. I'm not an anti-hero's journey by any stretch. I had to come up with an alternative model for heroines in stories, which helped me immensely. And I've written it into a book, and that book will be coming out in February of 2024. I'm currently in the production process, and it's been a lot of fun.
Oh, we have a date. I think this is the first time we have a date. So this is February 2024.
February of 2024 is the target. I think my birthday is in February, so I was going to try to time it with my birthday, so that would be early February of 2024.
All right. Well, cool. All right, so check out that. And then also, of course, the Heroine's Labyrinth, we've talked a lot about on this channel in the past. So if you look up Douglas Burton here on this channel or Heroine's Labyrinth, there's a lot of detail on that subject from both the theory perspective, and then also we ran down different movies and stories, analyzing it as well. And we're about to do that with Star Wars. So basically, the reason we're here is because I was also working on a script, or a story. In this case, it was a script. And I've been working on the hero's journey and studying the hero's journey. And I realized that there was a problem. I was having some problems with the early part of the script. And about I believe it was Thursday, I realized that it was because, I've got all the books on the hero's journey that we brought up when we were doing our discussions and all of that, and our notes on the hero's journey. And then also, we're watching Star Wars because got Star Wars up here on the big screen in the office because Star Wars is the one that everybody refers to as so well structured and following the hero's journey and so forth. But I realized as I was watching it, one of the reasons why I was having such a difficult time integrating what I was seeing with kind of classical standard hero's journey story structure and what I was actually seeing on screen in Star Wars is because Star Wars does some very non-standard things in its opening. And it has to do with the relationship between R2-D2 and Luke Skywalker. And I ended up asserting that the story actually begins with R2-D2 being set up to be the hero. And that once you realize that, there's a lot of things change about what's going on in that story. And I hadn't seen anybody talk about that specifically yet, because in all the books and things like that. And I just realized that, hey, not only should we be talking about when things or using examples of movies like that and specific examples of scenes when it is archetypical, the scene from the hero's journey, but we also need to be studying when it's doing something different so that you recognize it's doing something different. And then if it does do something different, why it works. If it's a good movie, you're like, okay, this one does something different. It's doing something non-standard. We also talked about The Matrix with regard to this as well. So I went through The Matrix as well. I believe that was a couple of days ago. It also does some non-standard stuff in the opening.
Notice that both Star Wars and The Matrix open up with a heroine.
You're right. They both do. They both open up on action, and they both open up with
a heroine who is in conflict with her native culture. Immediately, like under arrest, being captured in both movies. And both movies are very good examples of the hero's journey. I love The Matrix, and obviously I'm a huge fan of Star Wars.
Okay, so that's why we were here. So that's basically what led to this. So this is an extension of the conversation that was happening on the Morning Grind. If you look up those conversations, they didn't happen on Table Talk. If you look up Star Wars Analyzed or whatever, Star Wars on the Morning Grind, that's where there were 2 episodes that dealt with that, and also one in The Matrix. And Doug was in the chat for some of that.
Yeah, I was able. It's really hard for me to make a morning show, but I saw that Heath was tackling Star Wars. I got to be honest, and I say this as a friend. I saw that Heath's header was something like fixing Star Wars or how to fix Star Wars. And my first thought, I was like, fix Star Wars. I was like, Star Wars is like awesome. But I tuned in. Again, it was rare. It's hard for me to get in the morning, but I was able to tune in. I was listening to what Heath was saying, and I understood all of his points. Like, I think you mentioned, and I'm going by memory here, Heath, but I think you mentioned like Luke doesn't show up until like 17 minutes into the show. The wise guy doesn't show up till 42 minutes in the first film. So you would think these would be fatal mistakes for someone trying to follow the hero's journey and launching into it so late. And yet, obviously, we know that Star Wars was not a mistake. It was a cultural phenomenon. So it's our job to figure out why. And and I think Heath actually did something that was very important. He was breaking down where it deviated, what didn't make sense, what, even I think you were even recontextualizing it at one point with, if this is R2's story, if R2's the one going on the adventure, then this would be R2's threshold. This would be R2's call to adventure. I had not heard that before. And I thought it was a fascinating discussion. I also was pleased to see that you opened up the next morning grind with a follow-up to the Star Wars discussion. So it's a great discussion. It really never gets old, and there's so much to unpack with it. And you certainly got my wheels turning. And I have a very unique explanation for why Star Wars might be working on another level. And I don't think anyone's ever heard this before because the Heroine's Labyrinth is new. But I'm going to treat you guys. It's in the book. I'm going to be treating you guys some of the material that we're getting ready to publish in the book that no one's seen before. And we'll introduce this part of that discussion with what Heath has been working on diligently for the past couple days.
All right. Well, I mean, I'll say that when I was thinking about, I know the title with the Fixing Star Wars, but what I was specifically referring to, or what we got to in there, was that, that issue, because like when Cameron was talking about this specifically, that, okay, we're going to do this like a hero's journey story or something. Okay, you're going to do a hero's journey story. Oh, but by the way, your main character, you cannot have them show up on page 17. So
that's insane.
Right. So how do you fix that? Like if you're going, all right, I'm trying to write the hero's journey, I'm using Star Wars as a model, but we got to do this as something that's more commercially acceptable today. Introduce your main character in, page 2 or page 3 or something and have them doing things. How would you get that done in Star Wars? And we came up with a couple of different ways that you could change Star Wars to get that to happen. But that was all in the morning grind. We're now headed to Doug. I'm gonna let you take it away with our completely other perspective on Star Wars.
So I was going to say one thing. It's always interesting and this is a precursor. This is a little bit of a bridge between the morning grind discussion and then what I'm going to propose. But George Lucas based a lot of his Star Wars, and there's a lot of influences coming into Star Wars. It seems like Dune, I heard, is a huge influence for Tatooine and the Fremen with the Sand People, and also Hidden Fortress. And I had not seen it until a couple of years ago, about 4 years ago now. And I watched Hidden Fortress. It's a black and white film. I believe it was in the 50s. And it's very amusing to watch because there are unmistakable similarities between this Hidden Fortress film and Star Wars. And the reason I bring this up is because the unusual opening for Star Wars in some ways mirrors what would be an unusual opening for Hidden Fortress. Akira Kurosawa, Sable Phoenix just mentioned it. Seven Samurai Ran, which still has one of the best battle scenes in the list I just read. Big influence for Lucas. So Hidden Fortress begins, and Heath, I think you said you had not seen this yet. Is that correct?
Not seen it. I have not seen
so
it.
This is fun. These are fun things to explore here. But I'm going to try to share. Bear with me, everybody. I'm going to try to share my screen to show some scenes from Akira Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress. So the story opens with a taller and shorter character, and they're kind of bickering characters. You see the subtitle there. It's all your fault. Sounds just like C-3PO. And they're walking through this empty expanse, very much like the Dune Sea in Tatooine. And these two characters, the reason this is interesting is because these two characters carry the story in the sense that you're ignoring the larger conflict between these two warring clans. And you have these two almost insignificant, irrelevant characters who kind of walk into the middle of it. And Lucas tried to emulate that, from what I understand, with R2-D2 and C-3PO. He changed them to droids. They also bicker. They also cross these huge expanses, and they bring the viewer or the reader into this conflict. So it's very, very interesting that these two things are so similar. And these two characters, they argue the whole time. Let me see if I can show you a couple other photos briefly from Hidden Fortress. Yeah, so there's a lot of battles with swords and everything that are similar to your lightsaber battles. You have masters of the certain type of I believe not is it kung fu? I'd have to watch it again, but certain martial arts schools that are present in this. And look at the insignia on the back of this guy's robe.
Oh, that's what you're talking about. Whoa.
So yeah, that is very reminiscent of the Imperial insignia that I'm wearing. And even more so if you watch the new sequel trilogies, which I'm not a fan of, but if you watch them, the First Order is even more like the Imperial insignia that the bad guys wear in this show. So as I'm watching this for the first time, I was like 40 something years old when I was like, oh my God, like it's so blatant.
I gotta watch this now.
Yeah, it's just very interesting to see these echoes, these precursors of what would become Star Wars scattered throughout this black and white 1950s Japanese film. So it's just interesting. I just wanted to share some of these to show some of what Lucas was thinking when he was starting the show the way he did. Here's one of the main villains. He has a mask. Everyone knows that the samurai or Vader's helmet is mirrored off a samurai helmet. This is one of the bad guys. He wears armor. He's imposing. He's wounded, so he has a patch over his eye, and he has the big shield over the neck in the samurai fashion. So he's very Vader-like in some sense. Let's see what else. Yeah, there's those two again. The R2. I think those are the main ones that I wanted to share. The opening sequence with the two seemingly insignificant figures moving into the story and kind of walking into this huge conflict that's far greater than them. Very reminiscent of R2 and 3PO. That there's a Vader-like figure and that the bad guys wear insignias that are similar to the Imperial insignia. And also that there's a lot of not lightsabers, but samurai sword battles, reminiscent of some of the lore that ends up in Star Wars. So I couldn't help but think of that when you were having your discussion during the morning grind, Heath, because it is an opening that does not make perfect sense in the hero's journey in a perfect sense. But it makes sense if you include the idea that this was partially an homage or a device for introducing a large-scale conflict through the eyes of an innocent or two innocents. And I mean, kind of bumbling fools in a sense. R2 is pretty sharp, but 3PO has a little bit of a foolishness to him, I would say. So anyway, I just wanted to share that so you guys could see for yourselves some screenshots from the movie that – were you to watch it, you'd be like, oh my God, that's echoes of Star Wars right there.
Now I'll have to watch it and talk about that on the morning grind.
It's so fun. And it's an Akira Kurosawa film, so you're going to get something out of the film. The film does also portray, the film does portray a strong female samurai character as well. So there's plenty in that movie to watch and enjoy. 3PO is an old lady always fussing. Yeah, I think he was almost like a butler, I think is etiquette and protocol.
Well, he is, yeah, etiquette and protocol, yes. Droid. So yeah, that's what he's supposed the kind of thing he's supposed to do.
But yeah, it's a device. So you've got this low level, everyday mundane bickering that brings you in because we all bicker. If you have a brother or sister, you've bickered with them or buddies. It's such a mundane thing to be bickering like that, and so not heroic and not epic. To have those two characters kind of waltz into this conflict is a device that Lucas borrowed from. So anyway, the one thing I was going to share, and this is I have included some of this discussion in the Heroines Labyrinth book that will be coming out. I have part of what I did with the Heroines Labyrinth is I focused entirely on heroine-centric stories. Now, that's how I started, and that's where I gleaned a lot of the archetypal events and designs. But I also began to notice that secondary female characters in stories that may be male-centric or male hero-centric, some of the heroines in these stories oddly had certain parts of their journey mirror the heroine's labyrinth as well. It was kind of a fascinating discovery that even in male-centric stories or hero, centric stories, that you still have parts of the heroine's labyrinth emerging as an archetypal arc. And Star Wars, funny enough, is one of those stories where this is true. And I had not isolated it for a discussion like this. I had kind of picked several pieces of it out and it's spread out through the book. But once I started to piece it together as a focus, it got real interesting to me. And I think in some ways it helps to answer, Heath, what you were digging into, which is structural flaws. Intellectually, they should have been fatal structural flaws to an introduction of a hero's journey story by ignoring the hero's journey for the first 20% of your movie. That sounds insane. And I know that even today in writing, even in writing classes, if you don't introduce your hero right away, no professor or expert in the industry is going to give you a thumbs up on your work. They're going to tell you it's seriously flawed. So one of my explanations is that Star Wars, like I mentioned, even with The Matrix, but Star Wars opens with a heroine, and it opens up with a heroine in one of the most dramatic ways. And when I've analyzed this, when I've compared the opening and the archetypal events occurring through the focus on Princess Leia, there is a portion of the heroine's labyrinth, a strong portion of the heroine's labyrinth, that is being followed heavily with Princess Leia. And her arc continues through the story all the way up until the end. Now, the story becomes more and more of a hero's journey as Luke takes center stage. And just a disclaimer, I don't see the same heroine-centric tropes or the heroine's labyrinth much in Empire Strikes Back or in Return of the Jedi. I think by that point, the story has settled firmly on Luke and his character arc. And some of the hero's journey tropes, which are some of the most powerful, occur in the subsequent films in Empire and in Return of the Jedi.
Well, I think Leia's arc is weak as it goes on. Like by the time you get to Return of the Jedi, she was done wrong.
Totally. It really became Luke's story, and Leia was definitely relegated to more of a secondary role. It doesn't mean she didn't do anything important, obviously. She had many moments and heroic moments through the next two films. However, her main character arc kind of became a moot point, I would say. However, that's not true in A New Hope. Leia's arc, Leia's involvement is a huge contribution to Star Wars. And part of it's because of the heroine's labyrinth tropes, which are followed very closely in A New Hope. Even though it's a hero's journey story, the first 20 minutes or 15 minutes or so follow a couple beats of the heroine's labyrinth, and then a couple more beats later throughout the film. So we don't start at Leia's beginning. In fact, episode 4, which starts in the beginning anyway, begins in the near end of the heroine's labyrinth story model, almost act 3. In fact, Heath, if you have that,
you want the graphic?
Yeah, because I could show everyone real quick.
Let's go to the graphic. This is going to be cool.
So, and this is for the book. No one's ever seen this before. This is a graphic to illustrate the heroine's labyrinth in a single glance. So
this
you
is
see it's more spiral-like.
Right. All right, so here we got it right here. All right.
Right. So in A New Hope, we don't see any of Act 1 for Princess Leia. If Kathleen Kennedy wanted to make a heroine-centric story, she should have told Leia's beginning story, because it would have been interesting, and you could have showed this matching right up to Star Wars. But anyway, we start A New Hope with the Broken Truce, which is the final act, which is one of the final designs typically in Act 2. And you even see it's a police car. That's the graphic I chose to use. Which means that the heroine has broken her truce of conformity with the native culture and has overtly, out in the open, defied the native culture. And the police car is an icon that shows that there is a strong enough conflict between the heroine and the native culture, where the native culture is now enforcing against the heroine. So it's a very serious moment. It happens to Ahsoka Tano in the Clone Wars. It happens to Trinity at the opening of, it's actual police in the Matrix who are enforcing against Trinity. But in the opening scene of Star Wars, and I can probably share my screen here. Let me see if I could share this. Share screen. Now, how will this work if that's up?
Well, I just remove that.
Okay. So can you see that?
Oh, I got to put it out there. Now
there we go.
Yep, there you go.
So the opening scene of Star Wars is the princess fleeing the enforcement arm of her native culture. So even more interesting, and along the lines of the heroine's labyrinth, usually the masked minotaur is involved. Imperial fuzz. The masked minotaur is involved in the attack on the heroine. That is absolutely the case in terms of a Leia-centric point of view. In fact, the head of the Star Destroyer even looks like a minotaur's head. I find that fascinating, personally. It's got a minotaur-like head, which is very menacing in appearance, bearing down on the princess. Now, the chapter that this shows up in my book is called Protecting the Sacred Fire. So the sacred fire for Princess Leia is absolutely the cause of the rebellion. That is her sacred fire. That is what she cares about. That is what she is protecting. And that is what she is protecting in this opening scene. So you can almost imagine in archetypal terms, the heroine holding the sacred fire and fleeing with it and being bared down upon in a broken truce situation by the native culture. They are coming after her. Remember, Princess Leia is a member of the Imperial Senate. She's a part of the government, and she has broken away from that. That is the broken truce. So the government is now after her in no uncertain terms. Now, the sacred fire also has a degree of continuity to it. What will be destroyed if Vader captures? So what does she have that symbolizes the sacred fire? It's the plans to the Death Star. Why is that true? Because if the plans of the Death Star are stolen back by Vader, if Vader captures those plans, the rebellion is done. The galaxy will be at the mercy of the Death Star, which is a planet annihilating weapon. And so she has that. So she has the plans. Which is wrapped up in the cause of the rebellion, which is her sacred fire, and she is fleeing with those plans. And Vader's trying to capture it. If he captures it, the flame of the rebellion is put out of the galaxy forever. So that's how important this opening is, and this has nothing to do with Luke Skywalker. Nothing to do with Luke Skywalker. This is purely the end of Act 2 for the heroine's labyrinth story model. Leia is in a broken truce situation. So while she's escaping, and this will get to R2 here.
Let me go over
Let me
here.
see if I can pull that up. Is it still sharing my screen?
No, it's not sharing your screen anymore.
Okay, let me pull this
You'll have
up.
to redo it.
So you'll notice, okay, so if you look at this spiral, you'll see the broken truce. If you go, and you'll notice all of these archetypes that I'm going to cover are grouped together, so they do show up in relatively the same time in the heroine's labyrinth model. If you look to the left, the other archetype engages the fragile power. So let me see if I can share a screen. Okay, there you go.
All right.
That is exactly what this moment is. The heroine, in her journey, in her trajectory, she engages the fragile power. The fragile power is usually an individual that is childlike or innocent. They are usually either perceived to be insignificant or a burden even. You think of Ripley with Newt. The Marines didn't care too much about her, but Newt Ripley engages Newt. And also the fragile power proves to be rather important to the success of the heroine. Newt, at the end of Aliens, leads them out of that ventilation shaft, super maze-like scenario. Leia actually does it again in Return of the Jedi with Wicket, the Ewok. She befriends and engages a fragile power, and the Ewoks turn out to be very vital. But in A New Hope, R2-D2 is the fragile power, and she is essentially taking her sacred fire and giving it to this fragile individual. R2 is not a warrior. He is not dangerous. He has no chance against stormtroopers or Darth Vader, and yet the heroine entrusts this character with something, with the not just something, but the something that's of vital importance to her, and then by extension the galaxy. So she entrusts a fragile power. And talk about insignificant in terms of archetypal terms. When R2, when it's droids or no life forms found on the escape pod, the Empire doesn't even care to shoot at it. That's how insignificant it is. It's not even worth it. Could fly. R2 is able to fly right under the radar.
Literally, right?
Literally under the radar, yeah. And there's certainly a case from what Heath was saying that there's the Empire probably should have shot just on principle, that it was a lucky accident that they didn't, and that's true. But at least in terms of the heroine's labyrinth, the heroine is entrusting the fragile power, and the fragile power slips. Yeah, Lord of the Rings is another one. Éowyn, Lady Éowyn, brings Mary onto the battlefield in Return of the King. Mary is the fragile power. In fact, when Mary suggests that he should go out on the battlefield, Éomer makes fun of him. He's like, "Oh, I just doubt this length of your arm," and the guys are all kind of laughing at him. Mary is like, "How come he can't fight for the ones he loves?" And Mary grabs him and throws him on his horse and brings him out to the Battle of Pelennor Fields. And in the moment of truth with Lady Éowyn, when King Theoden is down and Éowyn has her total shield maiden moment, she blocks the Nazgul from King Theoden. The Nazgul is about to hurt her and kill her, and Mary's the one that stabs him in the back of the leg, which gave her the second she needed to stab the Witch King in the eye. So there's another perfect example of the heroine entrusting the fragile power with huge responsibilities, and then the fragile power comes through. So R2 takes his mission from his heroine very seriously in A New Hope. 3PO doesn't get it. I think
R2 is the willing hero.
Yeah, he's a willing hero, but because his heroine is giving him this huge role, a huge role to play. So fragile powers take this as such an honor, and they don't want to let their heroines down. And in story terms, they rarely do. These seemingly insignificant characters rise to such an occasion as to affect the outcome of the entire story. And that's clearly the case with R2-D2 in A New Hope. So in terms of the heroine-centric model, Leia's done two things now back to back. She has the broken truce. She has engaged the fragile power, which now is going to go on its own mission and deliver. So at this point, the fragile power is what becomes the call to adventure for Luke Skywalker. So that is how you have bridged from the middle of her story, the end of Act 2 in the heroine-centric model, and slipped it over to Act 1 for the hero's journey, which is the call to adventure for the hero Luke Skywalker. However, we take and that's roughly when you get 17 minutes in. So I think the dramatic opening is indicative of a late stage heroine arc, a very exciting one, and then it melds into the opening of the hero's journey with Luke. But we're not done yet, because there's a couple other very significant aspects of the heroine's labyrinth that continue on throughout A New Hope. So in the hero's journey, the villain is often a militant outsider, which is what the Empire is to Luke. You've heard of the rebellion against the Empire? It's this great struggle that's out there. And the hero's journey often features a culture-annihilating, distant dragon, which is what the Death Star is. Instead of a stream of fire that can destroy, it has the green laser of the Death Star, which can blow up an entire planet. So to Luke, the archetypal design of the militant outsider for conquest, subjugation, and destruction, and the fire-breathing dragon is very much intact. However, to Leia, to the heroine-centric story model, out of all the Star Wars films, we see the Death Star destroy one planet, Leia's home turf. So Leia, now home is battleground, is on this model in part 3.
Yeah, home is battleground right here.
Home is battleground. It shows a burning household, which for Leia is the moment of the destruction of Alderaan. I think Tarkin, your home planet of Alderaan. And she's like, no, we're peaceful. We have no weapons. She pleads with them not to do it. And you can even tie this into the Black Swan, which is apocalyptic imagery, which is associated with hero-centric stories. Notice under there, it says it can happen in any part of the story. Wizard of Oz, it's the tornado. Terminator, you see the nuclear explosion in Sarah's nightmares, which is apocalyptic imagery. Scarlett O'Hara, Savannah is burning, or Atlanta is burning. The destruction of her home city. And here in Star Wars, for the heroine, her home planet of Alderaan is annihilated with a single blast from the Death Star. She's the only one in the story whose native culture is directly threatened by the Death Star. So, and even more interesting at the end, if you want to say that her new native culture is the rebellion, which is the sacred fire. She's on Yavin 4 when the Death Star is bearing down on this planet. And I think it's interesting because Leia is the one who is the most threatened by the Death Star personally in all of Star Wars.
Well, because the princess isn't saved yet, really and truly, until that is, because she's still under threat with Yavin. I want to talk. Go ahead and finish your thought. I want to talk more about Yavin in just a moment.
Sure. It's just interesting that Leia's home planet is Tatooine is never threatened by the Death Star, nor is any other planet in Star Wars that we've seen except Yavin 4. And who's on Yavin 4? Princess Leia. The heroine, once again, is under direct threat from this Black Swan, this apocalyptic doomsday weapon. So I just find that interesting, and also of intrigue. The way George Lucas wrote the story, Yavin 4 was not going to be under threat by the Death Star. This was supposed to be a battle out in space. It was Marcia Lucas.
Again.
A woman, a woman who said, no, we should have Yavin 4 under direct threat where Princess Leia is. So I think she understood the frequency of threatening the princess on her home turf like that, with, the sacred fire of the princess being cornered. And Marcia Lucas, and some say Marcia Lucas saved the film with some of her additions. I just find it interesting that a heroine-centric trope from the Heroine's Labyrinth was reintroduced in the editing room by Marcia Lucas and had a huge impact on the final tension of A New Hope.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that on the Morning Grind because we were the first act focused, but we certainly talked about, because there was more of Luke in the script of Star Wars. With talking to Biggs and Cammy and Fixer and all of that, there was a bunch of stuff like that in there, and there was an attempt to connect Luke, because I think that the notion was there, the intuition was that Luke needs to be connected to that battle somehow,
right?
And so they were doing that by having him look up and with his binoculars and see the space battle. But all that got dropped, and that was Marcia Lucas. So in the beginning, I mean, I'm sure elsewhere too, but really in the beginning, realizing that actually this does work, even though if you just cut Luke out, his appearance at 17 minutes in works, and then she comes back in Act 3 in a big way with the Death Star thing.
Yes. Well, I just find it interesting that, and I shared another image. That's Alderaan there about to be blown up by the Death Star. We that's the only planet that ever goes, and it's the home world of Princess Leia, the catalyst of A New Hope. So I just found that interesting when I started to focus in on her, and I found these tropes recurring with her. From her point of view, it's an intimate threat to her homeland. For Luke Skywalker, it is a distant dragon to be slain. So the Death Star literally works on both sides, the hero's journey and the heroine's labyrinth, depending on which character's vantage point you're looking at it from. Luke's never threatened by the Death Star directly. He goes out and slays it. He goes out to attack the Death Star. Leia is threatened by it on both occasions in A New Hope.
So Luke, this was an interesting point that was brought up on the Morning Grind. That yes, you're right. Tatooine is not threatened by the Death Star specifically, but both Luke and Leia lose their homes. Luke's home is destroyed by the Empire, so it's not a planet destroying thing. That's Alderaan, and you wouldn't put that in there twice. So I mean, you shock of all, but you have the same beat that their home has been destroyed by the Empire.
I agree with that. In fact, when I was looking even at the Spiral, the Burning Homestead, I actually believe the name of the music on the soundtrack is called Burning Homestead for Luke. So yeah, the destruction of the home did follow Luke Skywalker as well, even in the hero's journey. So you could say the call to adventure for Luke was the arrival of the Death Star plans, the arrival of R2-D2. That was the call to adventure. He balks, and it was the destruction of his homestead that really gave him no choice.
Well, this gives him no choice. I would say that it was Obi-Wan Kenobi who calls him to adventure when he says, "You must learn the ways of the Force if you are to come with me to Alderaan," and that's when Luke balks.
Well, I think that's okay. Fair enough. I agree with you on that. That's an official call to adventure. I think there is a lead up to it. You know, the arrival of R2-D2 set all these events in motion.
That was to me the inciting incident. Some people don't like that term, but there's clearly an inciting incident when Luke's life changes and he actually physically jolts. Like his life changes, his inciting incident is when R2-D2 shows him Princess Leia, and he actually jerks back when he unjams that thing, and then Princess Leia appears. So his life literally was and figuratively and literally jolted. That was to me like the inciting incident that his life's never going to change, but that the person who actually makes the call directly is Obi-Wan.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think you're 100% correct, because Obi-Wan, you must learn the ways of the Force. That's the call, and come with me to Alderaan. So that's the call to adventure. There's no doubt. And Luke's like, I can't get involved. I got chores. The exact opposite of his dreams. But yeah, the destruction of his homestead is what gave him no choice. Luke did not change his mind until he had nothing left.
So now, regarding Yavin on both Luke and Leia's front, I was going to say that Yavin becomes a proxy for her home, because that's the new home. That's where Leia is going to be. She's there and she's under threat. That's definitely Luke's return from the other world back to the ordinary world. They leave the Death Star through a chase scene. Where do they show up? They don't show up back on Tatooine,
Nope.
physically, because it could be in some other structure or telling of the story. It could be Tatooine that they're going to next or something like that. So I mean, it could have, but here we're going someplace else. But what that is, probably because we've already had. I mean, what does Luke value on Tatooine? The family. I mean, I know there are other people on there too, but we've already just done the destruction of his family there. So we're going to this new place, and that's the new other world. The return to the regular world. Where you're
right. In a sense, you could make the case that the rebellion becomes their new home base. I think Luke, on Hoth, that's the new rebel base. That's where you find Luke and Leia and Han, and
we're going to do. James recommended this, and we're not ready to do sequels.
I saw that,
but we're going to have to do an Empire breakdown, because everybody says, "Oh, I love that so much." A lot of people say that's their favorite, and it's often given as an example of such a great sequel. But I don't see that one. That's the structure of that story analyzed nearly as much. All the examples in the books are Star Wars, so we need to go into Empire later. But we need to
believe it or not, some of the most powerful tropes of the hero's journey are found in Empire Strikes Back. And you can even look at it through Han and through Luke. But Empire Strikes Back, it'll be a fun one to unpack, because there's a lot in there, archetypally speaking and structurally. However, I will say the heroine's labyrinth gets lost after A New Hope. I do not see the same traces of the heroine's labyrinth in Empire Strikes Back, and I only see little bits of it in Return of the Jedi. However, as I'm showing in A New Hope, there are some strong there's a very strong heroine's labyrinth storyline through Princess Leia, and it actually has elevated my opinion of her, because I realize that she's the catalyst for the entire story. Her sacred fire is the rebellion. That's what she's escaping with. That's what she's trying to protect. That's what she's trying to keep from being destroyed. she allowed her home world to be destroyed in this cause. She is sacrificing everything for this. And the two heroes, Luke and Han, and I'll get into this next, adopt the heroine's cause. They did not have this cause. Luke had some indication that he was interested in joining the Academy. You know of the Empire against the Rebellion. He wanted to join with Biggs and Tank. So Luke showed some predilection of wanting to join the rebellion, but it seemed more of a pipe dream for him. Han had no interest. He was not interested in fighting the Empire. He was just a blockade runner, like Rhett Butler and Gone with the Wind. He just ran blockades and was a mercenary. Neither one of them were hell-bent on fighting the Empire the way Princess Leia was. She put it all on the line from the opening seconds of this movie, pretty much all the way through to the end. So if Sable Phoenix just made a great point. Princess Leia is the most competent character in the first film. Somebody has to save our skins. Yeah, there was. So I'll let me bring up. Can we come back to that? Because I think that's
so we can come back to that comment. Yeah.
Her competency is tied to a trope in the Heroine's Labyrinth that I'll get to in a second.
Okay.
But the next trope. So you see, she's engaged a fragile power. She's dealt with the broken truce from her native culture. She's had home as battleground. And now we're going to get into what comes right after the broken truce.
The poisoned apple?
The poisoned apple. Here, let me see if I could share this here. Share screen. So Leia has a poisoned apple in this, and it's unmistakable. There you go. There she is. She's a captive princess. And now there's a lot of complaining about how captive princesses send wrong messages or that they're damsels in distress. Leia never is in distress, except when they're about to destroy Alderaan. That's the one time she's like, no, like she breaks her veneer. She's captive, but she is competent and 100%. Now, Vader, there's the masked Minotaur. In fact, Heath, if you want, now that we know the scene we're talking about, if you want to bring up the summary of a poisoned apple in hero-centric stories, it's just amazing that this works so perfectly for Princess Leia. So in my book, there are summaries at the end of every chapter. And I try to give some of the basic building blocks of the archetype. What makes the archetype?
The poisoned apple. Here we go.
The poisoned apple is one of them. And Princess Leia has to deal with it. In fact, in the film, they zoom in on that. So usually delivered by the masked Minotaur. And if you look at that picture, Vader's standing right there. Delivered through premeditation and in bad faith. This one isn't disguised, but it certainly is in bad faith. Knocks out, disorients, or disables the heroine. This one does. The poisoning is something internal. Ingested, injected, implanted, imparted, and I'm going to add encoded for Android women. Usually includes a restrained or unconscious heroine. We don't quite see that. We do see her sleeping in the next scene. Often depicts a masked Minotaur hovering nearby the heroine, which this one does. Usually precedes an attempt to convert the heroine. And then the Minotaur tries to extract, desecrate, or subordinate the heroine's sacred fire, which is the rebel cause. And he even says, Vader, it'll take some time to extract the information from her. So he actually uses the term extract to describe what he's trying to do to Princess Leia. This is classic heroine stuff, to extract the sacred fire from the heroine. And Leia has it with this mind probe. And Vader says her resistance to the mind probe is considerable. So Princess Leia is following some of these classic heroine tropes, including the poisoned apple, which I even laughed that probe is circular shaped like a big black apple.
It is. I think it's like, oh my God, it's like a giant floating black apple.
Yeah,
like rotten apple. Like
what's hysterical is how unsophisticated the special effects were for that syringe. It's just a regular syringe, like soldered to the side of this thing, and it's coming in at her. So Princess Leia is pretty deep in a hero-centric flow throughout A New Hope. Her home has been threatened directly. She's had a poisoned apple. She's broken the truce. She's captured the captive princess. She's entrusted the fragile power. And there's still two more, I would say, that are very focused on the heroine.
Do I need to go to one of those in the notes?
Let me see. Let's wait 1 second because Luke does the hero's journey thing. He comes to rescue the heroine, right? That's what us heroes are supposed to go rescue the heroine. She's captured. Now, we can definitely make the case. In fact, I don't think the case needs to be made. I think it's just true. This is not a damsel in distress. Princess Leia is a competent, capable heroine by all accounts. She's just been captured. She resisted the mind probe, and she's still being detained. And here comes two heroes. Our guys, Team Blue comes in with the hero's journey to come rescue the heroine. And this is great stuff. She's almost like locked away in a tower. And to break up the trope a little bit, the princess is not swooned. She does not swoon when Luke comes in. She's a little unimpressed. Aren't you a little short to be a stormtrooper? But Luke uses the line, I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you. So he's the hero on the journey in this case. Once they rescue Princess Leia, I want to make the argument that the Death Star, which is where Leia is, this is where the heroine is. So far, the heroes are still following Princess Leia. They're trying to get the Death Star plans. They're trying to rescue her. So they're all revolving their decisions around Princess Leia. They rescue her, and I'm going to make the case that the Death Star is a labyrinth. The imagery throughout the Death Star sequence, the whole sequence there, is extremely labyrinthine. You have hallways, garbage chutes, elevator shafts. They're running and hiding. There's even a they call it a space mouse. And you always associate mice or rats in a maze. You literally have that little mouse on wheels moving around in the corridors. Yeah. So during the heroine rescue, we find ourselves captured in a labyrinth and remember in the classic heroine story, Theseus and Ariadne are both trapped in the labyrinth. Theseus slays the Minotaur in Greek mythology, but it is Ariadne who solves the maze because she puts string through the passageways so they can remember their way out. So heroines are consistently masters of labyrinths. So when Sable Phoenix brought that point up, how competent she was, and she's like, boom, into the garbage chute, flyboy. She's the one solving the labyrinth. Han Solo's and Luke, they're pinned down. There's really nowhere for them to go. She grabs the blaster from Luke. She shoots down the corridor. She shoots open the thing, and she dives in. She rescued him. Newt does the same thing in Aliens. Newt is the one who saves the battle-hardened Marines. This way. Heroines and labyrinths are together all the time. And here you have Princess Leia leading them out of the labyrinth. And it's funny, too, because after they escape, Han is like, I had everything under control until you let us down here, which nobody believes.
Right.
And I think he even says, if we can avoid any more female advice. So he's being, chauvinistic there. And of course, Leia pushes back pretty hard and insults Chewie, which I've never forgiven. She calls him a big walking carpet. What's that all about? But Leia is the one that leads them out of this labyrinth. Of course, there is a masked Minotaur at the center of this labyrinth with Darth Vader, and he strikes. There's a casualty with Obi-Wan Kenobi. So the masked Minotaur does strike down the wise guide, and losing the wise guide.
What's that? Why? That's wise guide. Everyone, not the wise guy.
Oh yeah, not Goodfellas.
He strikes down the wise guy. Right.
So again, to me, the sequence inside the Death Star, which is very much escaping a maze, is also very indicative of a hero-centric story. And I'm not surprised at all to see a lot of it is driven by Princess Leia in their help to escape the Death Star. And then one of the final things I'd like to bring up in the hero-centric story, and you'll notice if Heath, if you pull the spiral up again.
Oh, spiral. Okay.
It's all, and again, these are all clustered together here. you had the broken truce.
Right
and if
there.
you go backwards, you have engages the fragile power. And if you go back one more, you see the beast as ally. And the beast as ally in this case is Han Solo. It's almost unmistakable. I'll just bring up, I guess, this picture for Han Solo. Let me see if I can share this. Share. So Han Solo, and these two are arguing a lot as well. She becomes the beast. The Han Solo becomes the beast as ally. Both heroes are orienting themselves toward the heroine's goals already in the story, just simply by rescuing her. They're already in line with what Princess Leia wants out of all of this. But Han Solo becomes the beast as ally. In the trope, in that list that I gave you, the summary, Heath, the beast as ally is someone who adopts the heroine's cause, which Han Solo very clearly does. Secondly, the beast as ally often has an animal totem of some kind. The Millennium Falcon. There's always, a beast totem or symbol as well. And it's funny, the beast is often a doppelganger or mirror image of the masked Minotaur.
Yeah.
I don't think that perfectly fits, but I did laugh because in the first scene we see Vader, he's wagging a finger in Leia's face and talking down to her. And Han Solo does the same thing to her later inside the Falcon. He's like, I'm not in this for your revolution. But the beast is drawn to the hero in Sacred Fire.
Wait a minute. I got a point on that.
Yes.
Okay, if you want to, if you're saying what you're saying, the masked Minotaur is Vader, and that Han Solo is the Beast.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about theme occasionally on here. We've been talking more about structure, and of course, you do have to get the theme right as well. And this is not all about structure; you have to get the theme right too.
Right.
But here's a way that they are mirror images of one another. Okay, because one is, of course, one on the good side, one is on the bad side, right?
Right.
But
they're both mixtures of half man, half beast. However, the beast side is dominant in the Minotaur and is irreconcilable, usually. And the humanity is what's dominant in the beast as ally. He's willing to they both are drawn to the hero in Sacred Fire, but the beast gives up his claim to it and lets the heroine go her way. There's actually a great line at the end of Return of the Jedi where he's like, when Luke comes back, I won't stand in the way. That's a very clear beast surrendering his claim on the Sacred Fire of the hero in that line. But anyway, keep going.
Well, I was going to say that to me, thematically, Star Wars is about technology versus faith. Which one is better, technology versus faith? And you have symbols on both the good and the bad side of technology and faith. And this is something else that if I get to talk to Drake talks about a lot, that the reversals that they have the Empire and they have the Rebellion. But so those two are at each other and they can flip, reverses during the story. But the story is also about faith versus technology. And they put a representation of faith and technology on both sides. So not only can the bad guys and the good guys flip, but also whether who is up and who is down in a moment or a scene, but they also flip which is up, technology or faith. Grand Moff Tarkin is technology. He's countered by Darth Vader, who is faith.
Right.
Tarkin is the technology person. Vader is the faith person. Vader is the faith person. Obi-Wan Kenobi is the faith person. Han Solo is the technology person. Technology. And so when you're talking about mirror image, you're mirroring technology and faith. You're mirroring the technology on one side and the faith on the other. That's
a great point. Han Solo is an absolute non-believer in A New Hope. He has all those famous, it's a bunch of simple tricks and nonsense. And Luke, you don't believe in the Force, do you? I always laugh now from that Family Guy spoof. You don't believe in the Force, the thing I just discovered 20 minutes ago.
But I swear.
But there is usually some relationship in terms of thematic personalities that overlap between both the Beast and the Minotaur. And I would say in this case, they're both aggressive and talk down to Princess Leia, and they're both seen wagging their finger right in her face, like pointing at her face when they're talking to her. They both have that in common. And you see Princess Leia, he's not a knight in shining armor to her. She sees him as kind of an annoying, like, hothead, So, he has the beast totem with the Millennium Falcon. Falcon is an animal totem. Unlike the Minotaur, the Beast's humanity is greater, which
you also
Han
have
Solo.
Chewbacca. I thought that Millennium Falcon is interesting, but I mean, he's also walking around with an animal.
He is, but I would say the Falcon is his beast totem. I would say Chewie is his beast partner, his partner, his hero partner. But it is interesting. A lot of times the Minotaur and the Beast each have a totem. In this case, Han does have the Falcon. The Beast adopts the heroine's cause. Han Solo absolutely does that at the end of this film, and the next one, xenopathy, is the ability for a heroine to relate to someone who is completely unlike herself. She does that again in Return of the Jedi to build a new bridge in a diplomatic way. And then the other two we haven't really covered. Bridal ambassadors are a variant of the heroine who tames a beast, and also female diplomats, which Padme Amidala is, and Princess Leia, you could say, is kind of that as well. So, according to Leia's story, focusing on Leia, Han becomes her beast's ally in this story. So
he's the one who gets her out of the Death Star. I mean,
he's the one who helps her get out of the Death Star for sure.
But I mean, he's got to fly. Like that, he flies her out of there.
Absolutely,
he gets him there. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't want to minimize. I'm not trying to minimize Luke and Han whatsoever, because their stories are incredible and absolutely do follow a hero's journey model. But what I'm saying is, in A New Hope, if you pull up that spiral, there's all of these tropes that, suggest that we're also following Leia's journey in A New Hope, and her journey follows very clearly many of the tropes in the Heroine's Labyrinth. So we get one chunk of her story there, the end of Act 2, beginning of Act 3. And then that goes away, and we never really come back to it. She does not unmask evil in this. She does not break the spell. We don't see her really atone for anything. So we miss the end of Leia's story, and we miss the beginning of her story. And but in A New Hope, we get a huge chunk of a heroine-centric story model as your real catalyst for the Star Wars universe. And then, of course, the hero's journey takes over as we follow Luke and Han into the future.
One of the I was looking at, I was trying to pull up books over here because I was thinking about this quote that I found, and it has got to be. I was going to read it and figure out exactly what it says, so I'll just have to paraphrase. But I am pretty sure that it was in Bird's here, The Secret of Story.
Oh,
he's talking about he's talking about myths and truths about storytelling in different places, and obviously I can't find it right now. But when it's talking about, he says something like myth that what this does is this relates to the idea that we've got overlapping stories here.
Yes,
that we're overlapping, which is another thing that Star Wars is doing well. I think that probably, just because the story is well structured, and even though we talk a lot about structure here, the film like Star Wars is doing multiple things right, on a lot of different levels. It's thematically structurally doing it right. It's doing it thematically right. You're also, the editing we've talked about is just fantastic. Acting has to be there. The film is probably also doing something like putting something visually on screen you haven't seen before, and so it's probably like Star Wars. It's firing on all thrusters, shall we say? But yes. This was saying like the myth is something that simple stories are boring. You need to be sure that simple stories are boring and easy to write or something like that. And he was saying that the fact of the matter is that a simple, direct, well-structured story is one of the most difficult things that you can write. That and you figure out that that's true. I think that's very true, that when you're talking about, well, now just sit down, because that's what Cameron said. Just sit down and write a hero's journey story. Is there one of those in your world? I was like, well, yes, there is a character who does the hero's journey. Okay, well, then write that. You're not reinventing the wheel. Come up with some unique story structure that nobody's ever heard of before, or something like that, or do something highly experimental. Just do that. Okay, well, that's not easy. But then when you go beyond that and you want to tell multiple characters, and you want to have multiple characters going through an arc, and you want them all to be integrated, but having your characters like what you're talking about with Leia here, we're overlaying the end of one story, and then she'll have to go through some other arc later. Integrating this wheel of arcs, that cannot be easy.
No, well, I think what happens is a lot of this is done subconsciously.
Well, well, we'll hit that point. I think you're right. Yes.
Yeah, obviously the Hero's Labyrinth model was not out there. There was the Hero's Journey model, but I just found it interesting that once I cracked open Star Wars and pretended I was watching just Princess Leia, that these images were there. So I think what you had was a team of creatives, both Lucas, the art direction, Ralph McQuarrie, Doug Chang, you had Phil Tippett, you had John Williams. All the creative people were all tapped in. Whatever they touched, they seem to go right into archetypal imagery. They seem to be right on the beat of these things. Like I said, even the Star Destroyer having a head that looks like a Minotaur chasing a princess. Obviously, they didn't do that consciously. At least I don't think they did. It must have been a subconscious projection from their psyche to create this image. And who can forget the image of the Star Destroyer chasing down the blockade runner? It's one of the most famous openings in film history. I just wanted to point out that even though Star Wars is indisputably a hero's journey story, we open with a heroine breaking in a broken truce, carrying her sacred fire, protecting it from destruction. And this is not an unusual trope. This is right down the middle, classic mainstream heroine-centric trope. And Leia's awesome in it. You know, she's awesome. She does everything a heroine's supposed to do in that phase of her story. And to your point, she does it so well, and it's so compelling that we don't even bother with Luke Skywalker until 17 minutes in. And it's a real shift, tonal shift. You know, he's just a farm boy in the desert.
Right.
You know, and he's answering the parental figures. You know, that he's in a very immature state when we see Luke. He's actually immature through most of this film. Yes. Han Solo outmans him. You know, watch your mouth, kid. You'll find yourself floating home. You know, he's the one who's making the move on the princess. You know, I don't know. You think a princess and a guy like me, you know, Han's the man of A New Hope. Luke is very much a teenager out of his elements in this, and he doesn't come into his own until the end. So it's just interesting that you have a hero. You know, you think about like them trying to make Rey this perfect heroine and how it doesn't work. Take some notes. Look at Luke. He's not that impressive in a lot of scenes. He has his moments. In fact, Luke's first big moment of the entire film is when he swings across the chasm with Princess Leia. That's one of his most heroic moments. And they play very heroic music at that point.
And well, he does that. That's about halfway through.
Exactly.
You know, it's halfway through, but well, it's important that it's halfway through from a structural perspective, that it's not at the end. Right. When you're thinking about the structure of the story, because I think it's very easy, and this was the case with me early on, that you're like, all right, well, we got this character and he's going to be our hero and he's going to start at this point, and then he's going to end up doing his big dramatic thing over here, and then we're going to do linearly kind of step forward to, well, then he's got to do this and then this and then this, to step him all the way to ultimately get to this over here. So having the hero do something heroic, like having that big moment, like that may not come intuitively if you're thinking, okay, now he's going to go from here to blowing up the Death Star. But no, halfway through, you have a heroic moment. I mean, he has his moment where you know that he can actually do things and accomplish something.
Yeah, he's capable of great action. You know, which by the way, and then you go back to Empire Strikes Back, and Luke takes some steps back. He crashes. He doesn't, you know, I mean, he loses a hand. He's Luke hanging upside down from Cloud City is one of the most hopeless situations I've seen a hero in. And that's at the end of his second movie. So Luke still has a lot of growing to do, which I think is a great move by Lucas as a storyteller to continue to show that Luke has room to improve. But in A New Hope, again, I'll point to Sable Phoenix's comment. Leia is the most competent character in this story. And there is a lot of her story in this. And to me, it elevates Princess Leia up. I realize that I am following a heroine-centric story. And also it shows you, in my opinion, that it doesn't have to be either or. You don't have to have heroic men at the expense of women. You do not have to have a heroine who's capable of great deeds at the expense of the male heroes. You can have them both absolutely integrated and have intersections of these monomyths in your stories. And there's a couple times where I've talked about intersections of monomyths in the book that's coming up. And I realize Star Wars is a great example of a monomyth intersection where the hero's journey intersects the heroine's labyrinth. And it does so effortlessly. And all of them are heroes.
When Sable is bringing up the subconscious, yes, to finish, I was trying to go on the point with trying to integrate these things and how that's not necessarily easy, but the point was that some of these things come up naturally. And yes, that is the other side of this, that I've noticed that like, okay, you've got this princess. Where should she be held captive? Well, a tower. Why does that come naturally? Well, our kind of, or my kind of going hypothesis here is there's something psychological about that, these elements that come up. But that doesn't just because you have the psychological elements that put in and kind of bubble up, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be integrating a whole bunch of character stories really well. That's
correct. In fact, in the Heroine's Labyrinth book, I spend a lot of time trying to break down the significance of the imagery, of the archetypal design itself, what it might mean. And I even came to the conclusion that a tower, the image of a tower, especially if you put a princess inside of it, is actually a counterintuitive image toward freedom. That if just like you see a bird in a cage, the first thing that crosses our mind is, how do you get out of there? So I think that the image is, although some people might argue that we don't like to see captive heroines, I say keep the captive heroine. Not because we like the idea of women being subordinated, or it's because when we see her, intuitively, we want her out of there. We know she wants to get out of there. We know that getting out of there becomes the sole focus of captivity. Even in that Maya Angelou poem, what does the cage bird sing of? The cage bird sings of freedom. So to me, the tower, the cage, these are images of captivity which suggest intuitively this human desire to break free of any such restraints. That's why I think that the imagery is still important for heroines in their stories, because for us to appreciate her struggle toward for freedom, we must see first what captivity looks like in all of its forms. And science fiction gives us a pretty wide range for heroines and what captivity can look like for the heroine. Westworld is a great one. All those heroines break out of the park. You know, they're captive inside Westworld, and they want to get out of there. So I think that the human psyche bears the germ seeds of all of this. And when we see movies that strike those chords, and we instinctively know that there's something correct about it. When we see a princess fleeing from something huge and menacing, like a David and Goliath scenario, and she's holding something and she's running with it, we know that she's protecting us in some weird way. She's protecting all. Sarah Connor in Terminator. You know, I hear a lot of, and I talk about this in the book as well, there's a lot of criticism like, oh my God, Sarah Connor, she's just a womb. You know, she's second fiddle just to give birth to a man. And people get upset about this. I'm like, no. Sarah Connor is carrying the sacred flame of humanity. When Sarah has nightmares, it's not that John Connor gets killed. It's a nuclear holocaust and the death of billions of us. Sarah Connor's trying to save all of us every time she runs away from that Terminator. That is in here. That resonates with us. We understand that she's like Princess Leia. She's carrying a sacred flame and she's keeping it away from this menacing masked minotaur that's trying desperately to capture it and destroy it or capture it for its own purposes. So these bubble up from inside that human psyche naturally. And I think a writer, the best thing you could do, internalize all of these so that you understand what their significance is and what they mean and how they might express themselves, but then write without thinking about it, write intuitively. And then on the second or third pass, you'll catch these things. You'll see that you've put these right into your story. And then you can kind of work with it and expand it a little bit, fine tune it.
What about Neo and Trinity is coming up again? We mentioned those briefly, and Sable Phoenix says also that's very much the first test that Luke succeeds at too, because he wasn't given. So let's compare and contrast what happens with Leia and Trinity. Let's get your opinion on that. But so this is why this comes up. Much like Neo, he fails every test, although there aren't as many. Yeah, Luke is not given a threshold guardian. Because
Luke is Mos Eisley is his threshold guardian, or the Walrus Man and that guy. So Luke has two types of threshold guardians, as far as I could tell. The indirect or secondary one is the Sand People. The reason I think this is a threshold guardian of sorts is the first time is when Luke leaves home, he immediately runs into danger. And he runs into these Sand People, and the fact, and he fails. They rob him. They knock him. He falls unconscious. That's a signal that Luke can't break free from home. He's safer at home. Is the message there? When he goes to Mos Eisley, you just watch yourself. I have the death sentence on 12 systems, and it takes Obi-Wan Kenobi to defeat that threshold guardian. But those are two that kind of push Luke back and suggest to us viewing or the reader, Luke's safer at home. He can't pass these guys. These guys are too dangerous, too tough for him. Uncle Owen parents are always considered threshold guardians. Good point, Robert. The parental figure is a natural threshold guardian in all stories. Parents naturally want you close to home, and Uncle Owen says, basically, stop dreaming. We need you to be a farmer. That's your highest purpose, is to be a farmer. And when Aunt Beru even says, well, he's got a little bit of his father in him, a Jedi, an adventure, he's like, yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. So that's a threshold that Uncle Owen is placing. Your role is a farmer. The Sand People say, you don't come out here. Mos Eisley Cantina, Walrus Man, and I forgot that other guy's name. You don't come in here. Stay home. That's what all of these people say. Threshold guardians are like belligerent sentries guarding you from the outward journey from your house, from home. That's what the threshold guardians are.
I think then maybe I'm using it in too narrow a term. When I'm talking about the overcoming the threshold guardian, I'm talking about the one, because maybe we can have threshold guardians in different cases, but I'm talking about the one that you have to overcome in order to get from Act 1 into Act 2.
Oh, that Luke himself overcomes.
Yeah. So who is it that Luke? So you're right there. Okay, so Uncle Owen, I would say, is set up to be that character. That Uncle Owen is keeping him down on the farm. So in some other telling of the story, after or before or right after, right there when he's going to accept the call to adventure, the thing that he's got to do to actually get out from Act 1 to Act 2 is overcome a threshold guardian. That's pretty common, that there's going to be that character that you've got to overcome. And Luke doesn't have that moment because Uncle Owen is already dead. They use that for a different trope, that they had that being danger comes home. So they got rid of his threshold guardian for him. So that's why when Sable was saying that Luke was not tested to get out of Act 1. Now you're right, we do have the Sand People scene. But
I would say he was tested, but he fails the tests. I think you're right.
Whereas Neo fails his end of Act 1 threshold test.
Correct. They both do.
And
on the scaffolding is what you're thinking of, right?
Yeah, right. Yes, very directly. I forget where I was going with that exactly. So I was saying, that was brought up.
You were saying that it's a typical trope to have the hero defeat a threshold guardian in order to go beyond.
In order to go beyond, especially out of Act 1 into Act 2. And
you're saying Luke doesn't do it, and you're right. I would say that he encounters. So there's 3 threshold guardians, and they're all taken care of for him. The stormtroopers take care of Uncle Owen. Right. Ben takes care of the Sand People, and Ben takes care of the Mos Eisley Cantina thugs.
Yeah. And Cameron says that this discussion was that attack. And it's just such a great line. Being attacked by Sand People is not necessary. So Cameron was saying that, and I was wondering. I actually think that when I was doing the analysis, that attack by Sand People and the attack by Sand People and molested by alien at the bar. Those two are the same scene because they also have the exact same result. And I'm wondering if that's why Cameron was saying that the attack by sand people is not necessary, because to me, that's not, to me, I wouldn't have said that the walrus guy is a threshold guardian. That's telling you that now you're out of Act 1. You are now in the liminal space. You're in the area of transit, this bar. It's very common to go to bars and things like that. And now you find out that Luke is out of his depth.
Right.
That because you would ordinarily, if you had him be successful on his threshold guardian task to get out of Act 1 into Act 2, you just came off of a high for the hero. Okay, he did overcome like his uncle or whatever. Because in a different writing, he could have been there at the house. The stormtroopers could have attacked and killed. What would have happened is they would have killed Aunt Beru. And they would have only barely gotten out. In that case, a threshold guardian would have been like stormtrooper sentries. He's got to escape and like had him, and he would, he's got to get past the sentries, out of the door, onto his land speeder, and get out. Or Beru is dead, and then Owen is extremely upset at him. This is your fault. What has happened? Maybe they both live, and he's got to overcome Owen, who is now extremely upset at him with the farm is burned, stuff like that. That would have been examples of somebody to get right around. So if they had done that, Luke would have been coming off a high because he would have been successful, even though his family. But so then you got to show failure. So then you show how dangerous the world is and failure.
See, yeah, I'm wondering too. Frodo, does he solve a threshold guardian? I guess his first threshold guardian is what? Farmer Maggot, and he just runs away. He escapes Farmer Maggot, and then Prancing Pony is the bar scene.
Well, it depends on if you're talking about the movie or the book, because Old Man Willow is not in the movie.
True, that's true.
Old Man Willow might be one, because they've got to get through the. I'll have to remember that. But from the movie perspective, which is probably going to be more structured according to this structure. Well, it's the Nazgul. Because I'm pretty sure it's the Nazgul. I have to watch
but Aragorn stays up.
Because the Nazgul are coming. They accelerate all of that in the movie. So the Nazgul are coming in, and he escapes stealthily. Frodo does, out of the Shire as the Nazgul are coming in. So he escapes them through stealth. Because they're going.
Okay, so he more slips past the sentries.
He slips past. He shows that he's good enough because he does slip past the Nazgul. So yeah, it's probably actually even to that scene where they're going to the ferry. The Nazgul are after them.
Buckleberry Ferry, and they are able to escape. So that shows you that and that's a threshold.
Yeah, and that we are across that. We are now out of the Shire. That's a high, because I mean those were big villains. So that's somebody coming to them. And, so that wasn't Frodo. That wasn't Bilbo being Frodo being kept down by a father figure or something like that. That was the agents of the enemy.
True.
Who are making guarding the threshold to get out of the Shire.
Well, and I'll say from a world building standpoint, I haven't. This isn't in a book yet or anything, but I talk about insurgent evil versus insurgent good in terms of world design. And I always use Lord of the Rings as an example of insurgent evil, where you have this kind of decaying entropy, good society that evil is slowly creeping back into an insurgent evil, whereas A New Hope is an insurgent good, where you have this dystopian evil world out there and the good guys are the insurgents trying to bust it up. But I guess in either model, you have your thresholds for the hero's journey anyway. You have thresholds that must be passed. And it is interesting that a lot of heroes fail these thresholds, apparently, because I guess what it does, if the hero passes with assistance but fails, it really underscores the idea that of the end, when the hero totally succeeds on something big, because they have been struggling up until that point, and then they come through in a big way in Act 3.
Well, I'm not sure. I want to study that more, because my hypothesis is that most of the time the hero will pass the test that gets them out of Act 1 and into Act 2.
You're right. That's how it's written.
Standard way to do it. I think it's probably going to be a non-standard, because that's what R2-D2 has. I bet it's non-standard or it's not there. Like Luke Skywalker just says, "I accept," and then they're on the vehicle to the liminal space to get to the point of transit.
Well,
There wasn't somebody standing there. I bet that it's either they either defeat the Guardian or it's just skipped in that case. I bet it's non-standard to actually have a Neo type failure.
Interesting. Yeah, that's true. I don't know.
Well, I know I'm accepting this hypothesis, but as I study things, I'm going to keep note of exactly that.
Yeah, that'll be a good thing to keep track of. I will say, Cameron says that the sand people are unnecessary. Maybe I will say that it did serve one small purpose. I noticed. I wrote a whole article on liminal space about how when heroes are about to travel, this is true of heroines too. Right before they enter any sort of liminal space, a lot of times they pass out, and the passing out is some signal that they're about to go through change. Because like Dorothy, she faints when the tornado comes in the Matrix. He's gonna pop. Neo throws up.
Yeah.
And fall, in Avatar, he has to go to sleep in order to go into the Avatar body. Luke passes out in the Dune Sea with the Sand People. So there is a psychological or archetypal clue by Luke losing consciousness in a desert environment, in an open and potentially liminal space, that he's about to undergo a huge change. So there is a psychological clue there that I'll still defend as being psychologically significant or archetypally significant.
TSL frontman. I mean, I agree. To me, the Sand People seem to stand for the dangers beyond the fence post.
Correct.
Not yet entering the magical world, but something else that's wild and unknowable. But I would say that's also what Walrus Man in the Cantina is representing. This is danger. They're in the area of transit. This is danger that now that you've accepted the call to adventure, you're now in the transit space to go where you're going, and now there are dangers. That's being communicated in both.
There is something different about them archetypally in terms of their archetypal designs. Heath, you just said that there's a lot of these that take place in bars.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. Bars are a collection point of travelers and of differing individuals. In fact, I think Joseph Campbell states that in these settings, there are several characters. There's an underlying danger and a fragile state of truce amongst the characters, which could erupt. In fact, in the cantina scene, not only does Ben slice off the hand of the one guy, Han shoots Greedo. There's 2 deaths that are in this one scene in the cantina, in this one setting. So there's a fragile state of truce that can be broken at any time, and danger can erupt. So that's a big difference between the Sand People, who are the first danger you might encounter away from home. This is not a collection point. These are not travelers. These are native nomads. These are guardians just along the periphery of the homestead, that if you go just beyond that, you're going to be into a more dangerous part of your home world. So I think I think Uncle Owen is like a tier 1 guardian. The Sand People are tier 2. And then the Walrus Man and that guy with the death sentences is like a tier 3. They're the ones in the place. They're the real danger. They're unfamiliar. They're in these strange outer world collection points, like the Prancing Pony, like Mos Eisley. Even Neo meets Trinity in that like Rob Zombie club, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
So let's go back and talk about that though. So that's why I was going to say. So you're right. You mentioned that both we're telling the hero's journey in both cases, in Star Wars and The Matrix.
Right.
And in both cases, we're going to start on action. The decision's been made to start on action. And by the way, I'm now distinguishing between do you want your movie to start on action? Yes or no? And then does that mean that your hero is going to start on action? Yes or no? So in both of these cases, we have the movie starting on action, but that our hero is going to start on non-action and be a slower kind of burn. Although Nero is pretty fast, as we talked about. But we start on action on both, and it's a heroine. And but we go much, much faster in The Matrix. So how do we look at The Matrix, Trinity versus Leia's opening?
Well, it's actually kind of similar in a weird way. So you have a broken truce scenario where the police or the enforcement arm of the native culture is cracking down on the heroine. So you have a very similar imagery in that, and there's an enforcement arm coming after the heroine. And the heroine has information, almost like the sacred fire from Leia, that she's escaping with. And I would say Trinity also has a very labyrinth-like escape, to the point where she's being guided down the labyrinth. There's several scenes in the Matrix that has this sort of labyrinthine imagery, intersections, stairwells, zigzagging up and down stairwells, rooftops, corridors, apartment tenant halls. So there is a labyrinth-like escape that Trinity goes through. So she's trying to escape a labyrinth. So to me, this is archetypal imagery. There's a broken truce. She's also talking to the masked minotaur of that story, according to her, which is Cypher. He's a member of the native culture who's in disguise. And she's talking to him in that opening scene. So you do have the overarching conflict through the heroine's labyrinth in both of the opening stories, where the heroine is already deeply engaged in this conflict. And then we settle in on the hero, who's in a seemingly mundane life style. And the white rabbit, that's a heroine symbol. That's from Alice in Wonderland, the white rabbit. So anyway, I love the hero's journey, and I love my heroes. So I grew up on Star Wars, Star Trek, all this stuff. But the more I've studied heroines, the more I've been delighted to kind of find out archetypally how some of their stories have been woven into these. And very successful one. Matrix is great. Matrix is one of my favorite movies.
I thought that it was, when I was going back to look at what is the call to adventure, and you had put in the chat that, okay, it's follow the white rabbit, which comes very fast. There is the rejection of the call. You're ingesting the rejection of the call, but also probably significantly, he actually doesn't reject once he actually understands, because I looked at how that scene plays out, because you see follow the white rabbit on the screen. So you go very fast. We were timing it. And so there's a minute and 40 seconds of intro with Trinity talking to Cypher.
Right.
And then 5 minutes of the Trinity sequence. So instead of 17 minutes of opening, you get 5 minutes of opening, which is more standard. And then
much more abbreviated
seconds, you see Neo. So your hero is there 6 minutes and 38 seconds into that film. Okay. You immediately see his everyday life. He immediately has the inciting incident with that thing on the computer that says follow the white rabbit. And then when the people come to his door, they ask him to go to a bar, go to a dance club.
Yeah.
Right. That's it. And his response is no. So he refuses the call. I got to go to work tomorrow, which is a perfectly understandable response that we all understand. But then when he refuses the call, so we ingest that. But then when he sees the white rabbit, then that's revealed on her shoulder, and he says, okay. So as soon as he understands, he doesn't reject after he understands.
I actually disagree a little bit. I think that's the inciting incident. I think his refusal of the call comes when they pick him up from the bridge and he gets in the car. And she's like, all right, Copper Top, are you with us? Are you against us? And he's like, fine. And he opens the door to leave.
He goes to leave, yes.
And he looks down, and she's like, you don't want to go. And it's the heroine, Trinity, who's like, you don't want to. You've been down that road before, Neo. You know exactly where it ends. So she talks him out of it. But to me, I think that was his rejection of the call, where they put a little pressure on him, and he opens the door, and he's ready to leave. He's not going to go find out what the Matrix is. And then he reverses the decision and comes back in. But I do see what you're saying. He does say no about the white rabbit. He does say no, I don't want to go first, and then he changes his mind once he sees the white rabbit.
He goes through this. It's a non-standard opening as well. I went through it's a non-standard opening because it does go through a couple of different cycles because he fails his threshold test. Neo fails to get out of Act 1 when he doesn't go on the outside thing. So which is, I think, non-standard, but because he failed, we have to send him through another cycle. But it's so fast, it's still Act 1 is still exactly 30 minutes of that movie. It's a non-standard because you've got the offer in the very beginning, follow the white rabbit or no.
Right.
And he accepts. But that's not a big ask. I mean, on the whole, see that works because that's not a very big ask. Go to a bar. Well, I got to work in the morning. Well, something curious happened with my computer, and there's this chick with a tattoo. That's also understandable why you would accept and go to the dance club. Okay, then he gets his threshold test when he should be going out. The danger is coming home. The agents are there. He should be, to his office. It's home, but danger comes home. But it's coming to his office, and he's given the threshold test, and he fails that. And so, oddly enough, we kind of recycle. and we start going through again, because that was a call to adventure. Go outside. Neo, it's an actual phone call. Neo gets the call from Morpheus. Here's how you get out of here. Yeah, and get out of here. And then oddly, he fails it, which I think oddly is in a non-standard way of telling a story. And then we do the call to adventure. And you're right. There's another call when he tries to leave the door. But then there's another call with the pills. And that one he does not fail. I mean, or even reject. By that time, he's going for that pill.
Yeah, which is now culturally a major iconic moment.
Which is now a majorly culturally iconic moment. I one thing that I thought about Neo, and as it relates to Luke Skywalker, that I didn't think about when I was talking about Neo, the Matrix, on whichever morning grind that was. I think that a huge significant difference between Luke Skywalker and Neo is that Luke Skywalker knows exactly what he wants and where he's going. Luke Skywalker, I want to learn the ways of the Force and become a Jedi like my father. Very clear. And also, I got to get that droid to Alderaan. Those are very direct, that Luke Skywalker knows early on. I know where I'm going. I got to get this droid to Alderaan, and I got to become a Jedi like my father. Luke, so he understands the consequences of saying no, especially once his parents are blown up. Neo is different because Neo doesn't understand what he's accepting. I think it works because in order to motivate somebody to get over the threshold, like Morpheus is giving him a big ask when telling him to go outside and go along the roof.
That's a big ask.
That is a big. That is the opposite of, hey, you want to come to the dance club? This is the opposite of that.
Dude, I'll tell you, even the way they film it make me go, F that, man.
I'm not doing that.
I mean, the wind picks up, he loses the phone, and I was like, ooh, I think I would balk.
Yeah, and it's completely reasonable, especially when you don't even understand really why you're being asked this, because Neo doesn't know what he wants. As far as like, okay, I'm going to become this great hero or something like that. So, that's not in him. He doesn't understand why Morpheus wants him and what his responsibilities are. That's not going to come until later. So I think the rejection here works, and the Neo requires more motivation to actually get into Act 2 than Luke does, because Neo doesn't understand.
Well, I would say that Luke, I almost take it a little different. I think Luke needed all the extra motivation because everyone does it for him to get him out of there. Neo does have one overarching goal. What is the Matrix? So he wants to know what the Matrix is. That's pretty much his kernel or his seed motivation. That's what drives him to Morpheus. But you're right. His idea that he's going to join this underground revolution against the machines in a world, that exists in reality, that's terrible. That's all hidden. That's all after he knows what the Matrix is. But he does have the one goal of, what is the Matrix? That is a driving force for him to.
But it's not enough to drive him through walking out on that ledge.
No, it certainly was. But it was enough. It was enough to get him to switch. Maybe I do want to go follow the White Rabbit. And in fact, when he meets Trinity at the dance club, she's like, "It's the question that drives us," and he says it. He goes, "What is the Matrix?" And that's when she goes, "He's out there, Neo. Like, he'll teach you." So. He asks the question again there. And then when he's intrigued and Morpheus gives him the call, and by the way, I always wanted one of those phones with the one that snaps down like that.
Oh, yeah.
They're always so cool. You're right. He follows him to a point. It's really cool. There's another cubicle across from you. Go there. Really fun because you're like, oh, I could do that. I could dodge this guy. I can run into okay, now go out on the ledge of a 110-story skyscraper and shimmy your way. Dude, that you just went way beyond.
Yeah, where do I go? And where do I go after that? He does kind of hang up after that. It's like,
yeah, he's like, there are two ways out of the. Oh no, he said get on the Scout. He's like, there's two ways out. One is in their custody. I leave it to you, which is very. Isn't that like Isn't there something about that, like leaving the choice up to the hero? Like an Eastern philosophy or maybe even Socratic or something, but he does leave it up to Neo. He doesn't insist or push him or try to sell him on it. He says you can either go over on the scaffold or you can get captured by the police. And either way, there's a risk, I think, or something like that.
I have also something that I thought about regarding that movie later as I watched a little bit further into it, because that is a longer movie. Because like Luke Skywalker's tale, after you introduce like Luke Skywalker, that movie is a 2-hour movie. So you're like, okay, how long does it take to tell the hero's journey? 2 hours. Okay, but actually, there's a lot in that you don't necessarily have to show in the first 17 minutes. So Luke Skywalker's story is more like 112 minutes or something like that.
Okay.
Neo's story is 2 hours and 14 minutes. It's like, okay, here's a longer story, but Act 1 still ends at exactly 30 minutes. And so it's not like they took proportionally more time. They took 2 hours, like the time allotted 2 hours to tell Act 1. They didn't spend proportionally more time in Act 1. They moved very fast.
One big skip in A New Hope is so you have the wise guide. You know, you have Obi-Wan on one side, you have Morpheus on the other. The training sequence. Luke's was probably 30 seconds, maybe a minute with the remote probe.
They're in the same place.
What's that?
They're in the same place. Training sequence.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's classic hero's journey stuff. Mastering a competency, usually combat skills, but not always. It could be something else. But Luke's lasts very little. In fact, he's got very little training in A New Hope. They make up for it big time in Empire Strikes Back, where that becomes an entire segment with Yoda. But Neo's training sequence is actually pretty cool with the kung fu. And Morpheus is fighting Neo. Everyone gets like jacked, and they all skip lunch to go check it out. And it's pretty stylized. In fact, in my world building notes, I said if you're going to have conflict resolution through combat, stylize it. Figure out a way to stylize your combat. And Star Wars does it. They have different colored lightsabers. That's very stylized. You can use the Force. And then here in The Matrix, you have this like crouching tiger, flying dragon style kung fu and super speeds at times. So they both have stylized combat. They both have a little bit of magic, and they both are combat. It's combat proficiencies that they're learning, and both have a little bit of faith. The leap of faith trope, like at the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, he has to take that leap of faith, and when he steps out onto the left, Neo has to jump off the skyscraper, and Luke has to turn off his targeting computer. So there is that leap of faith element in both Luke Skywalker and Neo as well, to trust your gut, which I love it. It's very consistent.
Well, that's faith element there. But so what I was going to say is that, so when we're looking at watching Neo and Luke do the same things, we've got the threshold. So Obi-Wan giving up to, okay, that's later. That was great dramatic display of difference in style. Yeah, you think that's air you're breathing during that? Yes. But where the Matrix earns, I think, the longer time, because they didn't take it in Act 1. It's that the crossing the threshold from Act 1 into Act 2 is such a jarring moment, because that's when Neo wakes up in the pod.
Oh yeah, he throws up, right?
No. Well, he throws up later after he's been plugged in. But I'm talking about when he first wakes up in the pod. You get like the dream-like sequence where the mirror's doing something.
Oh,
but then going into Act 2, all of a sudden you wake up in Act 2 with the things connected to him, and he's in the pod, and that movie takes this huge, like there's a few seconds of that transfer space, or that intermediate space where things are going weird in the world. Like he touches the mirror and stuff like that, telling you, oh, in a few seconds, things are about to get weird. and Neo doesn't understand, and the audience doesn't understand. Nope. I mean, that whole sequence into Act 2 is 180 degrees from what that movie looked like, where you're expecting that movie. I mean, I remember when I watched that for the first time, I was like, whoa, what is going on? I mean, where are we now? What is going on in this movie? And it's disorienting for the character, for Neo. It's disorienting for the audience. The audience has no idea what's going on. It's completely different from Act 1. And so I noticed, so right out of before Act 1 ends, you have a long exposition with the mentor. Morpheus gives the exposition.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
Well, no, that's next. Because the before you enter Act 2,
just where he's in the hotel.
He's in the hotel, and that's when you have the pill scene. So we get exposition from the mentor there. Then we go into the crazy transfer into Act 2 where nobody knows what's going on. And then you have another exposition by the mentor. That's when the desert, which you do not have in Star Wars, because Obi-Wan, the transfer there between Act 1 and Act 2 isn't that jarring. I mean, you're still in space. We're going in a new place, but we've already seen space combat. We know what this is. Luke has a much more defined sense of what he is. But that movie needs additional runtime because it adds that other exposition. It justifies having that other exposition with Morpheus, the mentor again, because that explains what in the world is going on here to the audience. So you know what this is going on. And also more information to Neo about, now that you've accepted the call, what are we actually expecting of you? And delivers all that information. That's why that movie justifies the runtime. There may be other places it's added to, but that justifies the runtime right there. Because
I totally agree with that. What's funny, and it sounds like you had a similar reaction. I didn't know if I liked The Matrix the first time I saw it. I remember when I left the theater, I was like, what the hell was that? I was like, a dream world where they're growing people? I was like, I don't know. And then people were there's a buzz about it. I'm like, let me go see it again. Once I understood the premise and I started at the beginning and watched the movie again, I knew right away. I was like, okay, love this movie. I am so in on this movie. But you're right. It was very jarring because it seems to be going one direction and then it goes this other really bizarre way. And I guess it's almost like the trauma of being born. You have this umbilical cord, you're throwing up. It looks like amniotic fluid or how do you say it? Amniotic fluid?
Well, I can't. I'm not sure anymore.
And then he gets flushed, and it's baptismal. It's a flushing, and then this giant claw comes down,
and he's kind of like cross-like as he's
totally. It's like the trauma of being born. He comes right out of there. You're right. That it's very different from Star Wars, which is a much more easy to follow transition from space farm to space travel to Death Star. It seems a little bit easier to kind of follow the action.
Well, especially since you've seen space and space battles with Leia in the beginning. And I mean, we opened in space and space battles, so it's not surprising that we're going into space and doing space battles.
Yeah.
Amniotic.
Yeah, amniotic fluid.
Stable always keeps it straight with the spelling and pronunciation.
But yeah, Matrix and Star Wars, there's a lot of similarities with them. I really appreciate both films and the structure they have. And I just found it interesting that both started with heroines in the midst of combat as the competent mover and shaker of events.
Mm-hmm. Well, is there anything else we need to say on that topic, or just in general?
Well, I just wanted to present. It's much harder to present the Heroine's Labyrinth when you don't have people who are experts on it. Everyone's a little bit of an expert on the hero's journey, I feel like, on some little level. And some people are really, really good at it. And, people like you, you really take the time to study it, break it down, look at all of its expressions, all of its forms, and all these different movies and stories. And then even compare and contrast movie version versus the novel version, comic book version versus the movie version. Like, there's a lot of ways to analyze stories. And the context of the hero's journey is very easy because everyone seems to have some level of understanding. Heroine's Labyrinth is a new idea, so it's harder sometimes to lay it out there because I don't know how much. Now, a lot of the people on your channel have followed a lot of this, so they do have some basic understanding of the Heroine's Labyrinth enough to follow along, which is huge. And I just wanted to show what I thought was very interesting, that Star Wars opens with a Heroine's Labyrinth model very clearly and continues the Heroine's Labyrinth model while Luke's hero's journey gets off the ground. So it's almost like a counterpoint or like a counter melody to it. You have the slow rise of Luke in his hero's journey with the white hot action of Leia in the midst of her Heroine's Labyrinth conflict. And both complement each other. One of my big things is that heroes and heroines should complement each other. I don't understand why modern Hollywood or newer films are obsessed with this idea that If you want a heroic woman, then you have to have stupid dudes who aren't very capable surrounding them. I don't think that's a good model. And it doesn't archetypally resonate with people the same way at all. I think a lot of these shows or movies have proven that. And I think Star Wars is a great example. Two monomyths intersecting with the hero's journey taking over. And it's one of the greatest stories ever told.
So this is what should have happened with Rey. The heroine's labyrinth is arguably what, I mean, she could have done the hero's journey if she wanted to, but she could have done the heroine's labyrinth too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a million ways to fix Rey. They almost did everything wrong. They gave her mixed lineage. In one movie, there's a mystery. In the next movie, she's the daughter of junk traders. And in the third movie, she's Palpatine's daughter. I mean, I got whiplash trying to just follow the lineage. And lineage is important. It's important to characters. It's important to your sense of identity. You could say that the rebellion is Leia's sacred fire. The rebellion is not Luke's sacred fire. Luke's sacred fire is the Force and his father, his family lineage. That's what there's several cases through the trilogy where Luke subordinates the rebellion to his goals in the Force and his father. Mm-hmm. In Empire Strikes Back, after the Battle of Hoth, Luke abandons the rebellion. He abandons the rebellion and goes to learn about the Force from Yoda. You know, in Return of the Jedi, they're going on the strike moon of Endor. Hell, the opening battle is for Luke's friends with Jabba the Hutt. In Empire Strikes Back, Luke leaves his training because his friends are under threat. It's not the rebellion he cares about. He cares specifically about his friends. That's what makes Luke leave his training. That's what Luke comes in for Jabba's palace to save his friends only. That's not a rebel op. That's a rescue mission for his friends. And then he leaves the rebellion again. He goes off to see Yoda again. He doesn't come back till later. And even when he joins the rebellion, he abandons the rebellion again to go face Darth Vader on the Death Star. So Luke consistently walks away from the rebellion. His sacred fire is his lineage. So when you take that out of Star Wars and you replace that with Rey, who doesn't know her lineage, who doesn't care, who is told one thing about her lineage and then another that make, dark side lineage. No one cares. You're going to lose the audience, and they did. And you took something that's archetypally significant and you turned it into a non-factor. You could almost say Rey is anti-archetypal in almost every way. She doesn't need a mentor. She doesn't need the wise guide. In fact, she beats up the wise guide. I can't even imagine, Luke beating up Yoda when he first meets him. Like, I got you, Yoda. Like, what are we watching here?
Yeah. This on that subject, she often will do something that on the surface or visual layer will be what archetypically she's supposed to do, except for what actually happens is not what actually happens. Her interaction with Luke is exactly that. I mean, it makes sense that she needs to go and get training from a master Jedi. Makes perfect sense. You need a mentor, all of that.
Of course.
Okay, so you go there to Luke Skywalker, except for what actually happens is she's there to teach Luke a lesson.
Yeah, and Luke's lesson
doesn't work.
Well, so the Jedi have a sacred fire that is passed through 1,000 generations. The idea of continuity. So there is a sacred fire of the Jedi Order that's passed through 1,000 generations. So why do you need wise mentors in story or in reality? Because they are the holders of the sacred fire. Whether you want to learn about biology, film lore, or the Jedi Order, you need someone to pass that torch on to you and hand it to you. And it's going to be hard. The more difficult the field of knowledge, the more difficult it is to hold that sacred fire in your hand with any sort of command. And Rey, there seemed to be a general understanding of the Force, not a specific disciplined, wise version of it, a codified version. This is right. This is wrong. This is what we do for the good. This is what is wrong. We don't act on our passion. For knowledge and defense, we've narrowed it down to these things. It took a lot of generations to get the Jedi to come up with this final distilled version of what the Force should be used and how it should be used. So to throw all that out the window and have someone say, well, the Force is out there and I'm pretty good at it, and you look like a broken down idiot, you've already destroyed the sacred fire of the Jedi. It doesn't have, there's no meaning to it. Anyone can just pick it up and solve it on their own. So to me, that tells you discipline is not necessary. And anything that's worth doing, anything that's hard to do, anything that's difficult and hard to master, it's never like that. It's never like that. It always requires discipline and training. So when you break up the wise guide archetype and that relationship between the student and the mentor, you're already starting to lose your audience because there's nothing to resonate. I don't know anything that I've ever done where I already knew it and the teacher was I've had bad teachers, but that doesn't mean that I knew more than they did.
The teacher is an idiot.
Yeah, I was going to say, when have you ever had an idiot teacher? Well, hold on a second. Hold on. Well, that's not what I meant. What I'm saying is you still need to be taught. You still need to work through these things. And that teacher or that mentor-student relationship is vital. It's vital to that. And they took that away from Ray. They took all the archetypes away. They mistook a stereotype with an archetype. And they created this fictitious type of a character that seemed to have all the moments, all the victories, but none of them connected with anybody. There's no journey to get there.
Well, let's talk for a moment more about the idea of that lineage, especially the family lineage.
Yes.
Because that seems like that's very archetypical. It shows up a lot. And it's one thing that you might say, could we dispense with? Now you're talking about lineage, knowledge lineage that comes in from the mentor, but being Harry Potter has this, the connection to family. Luke Skywalker has this. Neo has his destiny. Like he's got to learn, but he still has this destiny that's come to, because they're not born, they're whatever else. So
right.
they have this idea of your father is important, your family is important, and you've been hidden in some way. King Arthur, Sir Percival has this. So this comes up again and again, and it seems like one that you might want to dispense with, because you might say, can I be a hero even if my father wasn't important?
Yes.
And yet it always comes up time and time again. And it seems like they thought that it was important. They had that intuition that it was going to be important with Ray, but we'll start with mystery, but then never really get it figured out. So even that idea that that's important, why is the archetype of like your father or your family in general, does this come up?
I talk about this in the Heroine's Labyrinth under the Sacred Fire chapter, because continuity is a vital aspect of story. Because and we understand this intuitively. You come from somewhere. Heath Robinson, you come from the Robinsons. There's something that came before you that was fed down, that was handed down to you. Family knowledge, family personality. There's a certain thing. We're all good at sports in this family, or in this family, we're musicians. These things are passed down. So and I think the reason this is it matters for heroes, obviously, as well. But I think they're a little divergent, and I can explain that later in a second. But for heroines, the idea of being a harbinger of the native culture, you are expected to pass something on. For the heroine, it's the idea of your creative powers being passed along. So in the primal sense, it's having babies, right? Having babies, you can perpetuate the culture by becoming pregnant, by having kids and raising those kids. That is a primal sense of what the native culture wants you to do. They place a premium on that. Archetypally speaking, it could be anything. Like you just said, family lineage, the Jedi Order, the cause of the rebellion, whatever flame needs to be passed on is important, because to a character, just like to you, why do you study all these films? Why do we care so much about Star Wars and because that's what came before. And if we want to carry this torch, if we want to hold that sacred fire in our hands and build something ourselves, if we want to write our own story, we're going to have to understand this mesmerizing flame that only a few people have wielded with such great power. So archetypally speaking, we understand this. So when you put some sort of continuity, some lineage into it, that's one version of it. That's one version. Or a discipline like Jedi, the mastering the Force is another version of it. So bloodline, lineage, tradition. This is one that hits heroines all the time in an adverse way. We've always done it this way. We expect you to do it this way. And the heroine's like, but I want this other thing. I want to break the continuity. Continuity matters to characters because it's what came before. And part of our identity, whether we like it or not, is wrapped up in what came before. Even people who have been adopted, who have different biological parents than who raised them, are still utterly curious about who those people were. Who were my biological parents? I've talked to, I have friends of mine who were adopted, and they still are fascinated with their actual lineage. So I think there's something internal in our heads. We want to know who we are. And the first context is, where did we come from? And now, knowing that, where are we going? And I think that's a fundamental thing that heroes and heroines grapple with. That's awesome.
Thank you, Table Phoenix, for the $2. Thank you.
That's awesome.
It seems to be like, okay, can I do this? Can I be a hero? I'm a nobody. I guess
Parzival, you just said.
I'm sorry.
Parzival,
right? Yeah. Can I do this? I'm a nobody. But so the archetype seems to be saying, well, everybody comes from someplace. So instead of taking a hero who is actually a nobody, and just, you're actually completely insignificant, it's probably telling you that, yeah, everybody comes from someplace. You actually are somebody. There's something, you are from somewhere. And so maybe that's one of the reasons why our heroes often have, like in the hero's journey, often have family connections to something greater. Like, no, you're not just nobody. You actually do have a history. There's you can do this too.
Yeah, well, I think it's a childlike thing to try to define yourself. When you're trying to search out your own identity, you're looking at, well, where did I come from? Who are my parents? What is my culture? Because your culture is passing you information and wisdom and advice and strategies for life as well. I think Zero the Blade even said an Eastern mindset. A lot of Kung Fu stories, a lot of them, which are very similar to Westerns in some ways, have the idea that there's a manual or a version of Kung Fu or a martial art that's very sacred. It's a sacred text, which is well defended by the martial artists. And Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon has, I think it's Wudang Kung Fu from Wudang Mountain. And the heroine, she's like an anti-heroine. The Jade Fox steals the manual and reads it. She misreads it, but she learns some of the Kung Fu and gets really good at it. But the aristocratic daughter, who can read, reads the manual correctly and learns how to surpass her mentor. That's a good explanation for why she was better than her mentor. Literacy. The illiterate mentor could only get this far, and then the literate student was able to read the text and get past her. So there's still this idea of a sacred fire being passed down. And in this case, it's Kung Fu. Li Mubai in that movie is like, let me show you the right way. He wants to be her mentor because he knows the sacred fire. He wants to pass that on to her. So I still think, whether it's a Western or Eastern mentality, there is something there's something valuable from our past that can be passed down. And it seems like a lot of heroes and heroines, their job is to find out what good to master and then how to add to it if possible, or at least how to master it enough to pass it on to someone else.
The learning Kung Fu, that of course, that's in The Matrix as well. And when I was watching that, I've only rewatched about half of that movie, but when he's in his combat training, the combat training where they're just putting stuff into his mind.
Yeah,
that's actually, I realized that was the first time. Yeah, downloading all of that. That was actually one of the first times that they Neo gave them a reason to believe. That he actually did something, because Morpheus comes in and asks, I think it's Tank, like, how's he doing? Because everybody talks about how great he is. Great
neurokinetics are off the chart.
Yeah, and when he says something like, how's he doing? And Tank says 10 hours straight. He's a machine.
Which you would think in the Matrix world, being called a machine is an insult.
But that must have been very deliberately put in there.
Sure, absolutely.
Where he comes from, that he's a machine. But that's the first time that he's kind of passing a test. He's showing everybody. Now, of course, he's going to lose to next. But that's when people are saying, well, this guy is different. Man, look at how he's taking all this downloading.
Yeah. Well, and that one time when he's punching Morpheus, his hands do that kind of like skipping motion, and you could see people are like, "Oh wow, like, something's going on here." Of course, and then Morpheus beats him, and then he fails the jump test. But my point is, there seems to be a strong relationship between an individual and the world you come from that's giving you information that you're supposed to master, and perhaps something that came before you that's being passed to you. And I think that is very easy to grasp and understand, and how the hero or heroine handles it seems to be a pretty fundamental core choice in all of these stories. Which way are they going to break? I did note one thing that I find interesting between hero and heroine stories is ethics. I don't see ethics as much, like the use of force, the ethics of force. I don't see them as much in heroine-centric stories for whatever reason. In more male warrior-centric stories, there's a lot of discussion on the ethics of force. Star Wars, Matrix, Karate Kid, all deal with that. Like, what is right and wrong? When do you go too far with this power? Whatever it is you're doing.
And that's not in the heroine's side of things?
I don't see it as much in the heroine stories. They don't seem to... That doesn't seem to be a major focus for heroines. Like, hey, watch out. Otherwise, you'll go too far with power or force. That you might find that in some stories, but that doesn't seem to be an emphasis in heroine-centric stories. Usually the emphasis is on the heroine's understanding of ethics within the native culture and whether or not she's going to influence some change on those. Princess Leia, she disagrees with the Galactic Empire. She's going to try to change that. She doesn't like that, but they're not telling Princess Leia, be careful. You don't want to use force the wrong way. Like that's absent mostly from Princess Leia's quest.
Is that you think that has something to do with trying to deal with males' increase in physical size or strength in puberty?
I do think that has something to do with it. I suspect that it does. I have a feeling that guys might get, and this is generally speaking, if I punch somebody, I might be a lot more likely to hurt somebody than maybe if my sister did, in general terms and on average. So I think there is a little bit more focus on like, guys, you got to know how to rein it in. You don't want to cross the line. You can do a lot of damage. You get yourself in a lot of trouble really quick if you don't know how to control yourself. So I do think that those messages end up in some of these warrior stories. I just don't see it as much in heroine stories, that concern anyway.
James, we're going to have to schedule a time soon when we have time on the table talk to talk with James, because he's got a lot of notes. He's taken a bunch of notes on the Heroine's Labyrinth.
Oh, awesome!
I got to talk with him. We talked on a members only stream, and we started to get into this. But he's got lots of notes on the on this and wants to talk to you about it. So we're gonna have to do that.
Zero the blade. You are correct.
Or if you've got a gun.
Yeah, trust me. I'm not saying that women aren't dangerous or can't cause harm. I'm just saying in terms of story, the emphasis on the ethics of force is in a lot of male-centric stories and less so in heroine-centric stories for whatever reason. We could speculate on that, but I'm talking purely in story terms. But absolutely correct. Heroines can be just as dangerous.
Well, I thought when you first said that, you were going to go the opposite direction and saying that, well, we tend to engage with the ethics of that in the heroine's story, because in the male's, the hero's journey, you often just have to go fight something. So you're not worried about the ethics. I thought you were going to say the ethics are not explored because it's kind of implicit that something's fighting you, you fight back. That's where I thought you were going.
I think that in a warrior trope, that's expected. That's almost a given. A lot of times, though, like again, Karate Kid and Star Wars are two great examples. Cobra Kai talks about this all the time. The ethics of force. There's the good force, Miyagi-Do, and then there's the bad force, Cobra Kai. There's the good side of the force and there's the dark side of the force. There always seems to be a little bit, which destiny are you going to go? Where are you going to, which way are you going to break? that dichotomy does not seem to be as heavy. Like, you don't see this in Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz. You might see it in something like Kill Bill. In fact, it's not even really in Kill Bill, which has a heroine who's a clear warrior woman, which has a ton of Eastern tropes in it. That actually follows a lot of the heroine's labyrinth as well.
I've got Retro Nerd Girl is here.
Oh, hey, Retro.
Good to see you. Good to see you. YouTube user. Looking forward to hearing James's take. And please do hit the like button. I was gonna say this hasn't been developed yet, but I'm not sure where this might go someplace. I was trying to think in terms of story structure as well. That it seems like often the hero's journey is set up to go someplace and then come back. Like that's the classic kind of you're going to go and then you're going to come back. And I was wondering if there is some way, but it can be told. I was calling this like keep away. What are your heroes going to be doing? Are they going to be playing keep away from the bad guys, or do they need to go and get something from the bad guys? Are they playing keep away, or are they playing keep away, or are they doing a retrieval operation? And so I'm wondering, and also whether or not you're starting on action or you're not starting on action. I talked about that in the beginning. That certain things are going to happen in certain orders, whether you've got to go and get something, whether your good guys have to go get something, or they got to keep something away. And like in Star Wars, they got to keep something away.
Lord of the Rings, they got to keep something away.
In the Lord of the Rings, they got to keep something away. Right. So we got these stories where the good guys have something and the bad guys have got to
get it.
got to get it. Right. The bad guys are playing the active part. On the other hand, it seems like the more standard structure then would actually be to have the heroes go and get something. Because it seems like, okay, if like for instance, you're sitting here at your village at home, and then the dragon comes down and sits down and attacks. And now that's even could be beginning on action. Oh my God, I was just sitting here and then the village got attacked by this dragon. What can kill the dragon? The magic sword.
Magic sword.
So I got to go into the other world to get the magic sword. So this is a story where the hero has got to go and get something, from the bad.
Or like Clash of the Titans, where he has to go get Medusa's head.
Yes. And then you return, and then the return is back home, because then your climax is going to be, I went and got the magic sword in the other world, and now I've got to actually defeat the dragon here.
Yeah, Clash of the Titans is pretty classic hero's journey stuff. He gets the magic sword, the magic shield, Bubo, the owl. And, he has to slay Medusa. There's a very clear, Cerebus is the ultimate threshold guardian. I've seen Cerebus mentioned many times. We were talking about threshold guardians that the hero defeats. Cerebus, the three-headed dog, he has to slay that dog before he can get into Medusa's temple to cut off her head without turning to stone and get back. He also has a side quest where he has to get the eye. Remember? The three crones.
It's been a while, but yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
He has to go up this mountain. I always love this. I always thought it was such a manly moment as a kid where they're climbing this mountain. The one guy's foot slips and the other guy catches the foot and shoves it back up as they climb the mountain. It's all sword and sandal stuff. It's great.
Let's see. I think that might be it. So I think this has been a fantastic addendum or extension of the discussion on Star Wars and its structure and all of that. I want to reach out. I have not done this yet. Reach out to Maxwell Alexander Drake, because I want him to talk about why he doesn't think the beginning of Star Wars is necessary, which is this thing that stuck with me. And maybe that's what he said and stuck with me since years, ever since I heard that. He was like, ask me some other time. I think it was at the end of a presentation. Ask me some other time about why the prologue and intro of Star Wars doesn't need to be there. And I never gotten to. So I wonder if it hits on some of the same things that I talked about on the morning grind. But that might be a great way to wrap up that discussion. Although we might have to discuss it more as I go into Act 2 or Act 3 and Act 4. There might be more things to say about it. Who knows? There are all kinds of topics.
Well, I think you made a great point that if you focus on the hero's journey in Luke Skywalker, then there's a huge 17-minute chunk that seems to be oddly out of place. If you're trying to structure a story, you would not normally do this. And you're right. You're absolutely right. My only spin on that was that this is actually a heroine-centric model in the middle that captures our attention, and it was done really, really well. And that set the table, and it sort of blended into the hero's journey. That's what I think happened, which is kind of the opposite of Barbie, which started as the hero's journey and then kind of settled into a heroine's labyrinth model on the second half of the film. So there's a lot you could do. The heroine's labyrinth has helped me understand stories from a completely different angle and make sense of them, especially from a structural standpoint.
From the Barbie idea, I might have gone and watched it again, but I messed up over the weekend and didn't make it because my times were wrong. I might be done with going to the movie theater for a little while, but I might take my stepmother to go see it because she collected Barbies. And if I do, I'm going to think about it in terms of the structure that you and Cameron and Brianna were talking about. But actually, James had commentary on that we were talking about. We were talking about a blending with Cameron. We were talking about this. Are we seeing a masterful blending of the hero's journey with the heroine's labyrinth? And it seemed to be that you all came to the conclusion on the stream that we were. But James has this idea that maybe these things are not as different as that. The heroine's labyrinth is going to be a subset of the hero's journey, and so the interplay between those two things might not be as bizarre as it might seem if you were thinking of them as separate things.
Okay,
so that's
and that's fine. I'm sure James has thought it through. He's not just winging it. I would just say that the hero's journey and the heroine's labyrinth are very much the same in terms of a growth arc. They're both growth arcs, so you're going to get some similarities in terms of possible expressions in the scope of the story. But I would still argue that the archetypal designs themselves, when you break them down, are fundamentally different, and the nature of the conflict is different, and the way you get there is different. So I would still, I'm me, I'm pro heroine's labyrinth, obviously, but I would still argue that they're distinctive enough to be, or they're different enough to be two distinct models. And when I look at them as two distinct models, I can make sense of things structurally. And Heath, you love to talk structure, and for good reason. It's fundamental to storytelling. Whether you break it down from a pure analysis standpoint or intuitively from a writer's standpoint, you still need to understand structure on some level. And the Heroine's Labyrinth has provided a model that has helped me understand structure. Tonight's discussion is a great example of how the opening sequences of Star Wars followed a model that was different from the hero's journey. We knew it wasn't the hero's journey until 17 minutes in, or it may have been a hero's journey for R2. The Heroine's Labyrinth explained it to me in a way that I can understand. And then I also understand when that is over and we are in a different archetypal model, which was the hero's journey. Like I could tell when one ends and one begins. So I still think they're two completely distinct things. I think they're similar in the fact that they are maturation processes that human beings understand and recognize. But I do think they're different. But I'm totally open to talk about it.
Well,
and James is a smart guy, so
yes,
it would be a good discussion.
It's going to be a great discussion. All right. Well, we'll come up with something. It could be that. It could be, if James isn't available, it could be more Star. We still got more Star Trek to talk about too. So there's a lot of
there's 5 and 6 out there, man.
5 and 6 out there. I haven't been to see. You saw Mission Impossible. I have not seen that yet. I didn't realize it was such a long movie too.
It is long. I think that was a fatal flaw for this. It had such good action, but it was long. But I liked it.
I might have to wait until it's on a streaming service to see it rather than go out to see that one. And you're going to see Oppenheimer tomorrow, you said.
Tomorrow night, I'm seeing it with my mom. Can't wait.
So we might have to talk about Oppenheimer. Well, we'll see what you think. We'll see if you've got great insight into Oppenheimer.
I heard it's a real like it's done in a very out of order way.
It is. He plays with time. It's
Nolan.
Nolan likes time. All right. So everybody, Faraway Bird, check out Faraway Bird, and the Heroine's Labyrinth is coming, right?
It's coming. We're working on the cover right now.
All right. Everybody, please also like the stream and subscribe if you have found us, because I would love to have you here for more of these. Look up the Table Talk. I've got all these organized on a playlist. So if you've enjoyed this, please do check out the Table Talk playlist, and you can see more from Doug and also our other guests, and more on the Heroine's Labyrinth and the story structure, as well as other things in tabletop and geekdom and things like that. So please do check out the Tabletop playlist if you've enjoyed this. I will see everybody tomorrow for the morning grind, 9:30 a.m. Central. Bye, everybody.
Awesome. Good night, everybody.